Hello and welcome to the Primal Polar Pod, where we're demystifying the masculine and connecting you to your primal. My name is Antonio Mazzola, and today we have a special guest, Mark Guay, who is leading Fathers Without Compromise. Before we dig into that, just wanted to let you know that our winter retreats are sold out. So thank you very much to the men out there. And we have spots available for the summer Primal Polar Bear Adventure retreats. With that being said, Mark, can you please tell us about you and what you do?
Yeah, Antonio, thanks so much for having me here, brother. I appreciate it. A little bit about me is I run, as you mentioned, Fathers Without Compromise. I've been coaching for about 15 years. Fathers Without Compromise is a group coaching program and community specifically for business leading fathers to help them grow a great business and be a present and intentional father without compromising one or the other. Aside from that, I'm a executive and leadership coach, and I've worked with leaders at some of the biggest companies in the world and startups as well. And so it's an honor to be here.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thanks for being here. So can you share a bit about your personal, let's say, men's work journey or your journey that got you where you're at over the past 15 years? And what were some of the pivotal moments?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot I can share. So feel free. I want to be really clear and say, feel free to poke and prod, man. I mean, from what I sense with you, and having been on one of your retreats, is that you go deep and you bring men together on a real raw front, and that's what I'm all about. So feel free to to really dive into the nuances of what I share here. Men's work journey. It started during a very challenging time in my life when. Well, first of all, let me go back and say I've always been curious about what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman. I was raised mostly by women. There's a whole story about my father I can share. But even in college, before sex and gender was like a thing people talked about, I took a course on it. I thought it was really interesting. Anthropology was an undergrad of mine. And so I've always been interested in the human experience. So I'll kind of surface that for a moment. And then in my 20s, my wife got really sick, and she went from running a half marathon to me pushing her in a wheelchair through something called Lyme disease, which some of your audience might be familiar with. And it was a really harrowing experience. It was an extremely challenging experience. And at that same time, I was a competitive triathlete. I qualified for World Court or Team USA and World Long Course Championships. And I was on this path to, really excel in my triathlon career. And the mix of pushing myself really hard physically and then coming home to my wife just getting sicker and sicker and sicker, it brought me to a real dark place. And at the same time, I was working full time as a high school English teacher. And I had to put on this mask every day, and it was fine for a couple of years, because I was used to it. I developed a really good skill to be able to put on a facade, like everything's great, and I'm a man, I'm stoic, I could, get through everything. And it worked. I worked for about, I don't know, maybe about 4 or 5 years if I really sit with it. And then eventually it didn't work anymore. I just noticed, wow, this is really eating me up inside. I started driving around at nighttime when it was the winter in New York at the time, and it was really cold outside. We're talking, 5 degrees Fahrenheit, if not negative. And I would put my hand out the window just to feel the pain of the cold because I was so numb. I just had grown so numb from all the pain that I just kept stuffing inside. And eventually, I think a lot of men, I started reading books. I connected with another man who was interested in men's work, and we started working on each other. We talked about our journeys with therapy. We opened up intellectually to each other. Then we started, challenging each other through emotional release. We would do stuff in person, and that obviously kind of opens up the whole gates. And then once I started to really feel the results of it, and the way I kind of understand it is that once I was able to really create space inside, I realized I had more space to be able to tackle the challenges again. So the stuff that was really beating me down was no longer beating me down. I was able to come back to my marriage, was able to come back to my career with more intention, more energy, more presence. And also, I want to share, it wasn't just that, though. It wasn't just about performance. It was also, it was like a new part of me like a part of me had woken up that I didn't realize was asleep my whole life. And we can go back into the, trauma and childhood. But in the men's work journey, the way I've come to understand it is you resensitize the being. And that's not at all to say that it weakens. It actually is a heightened awareness. You become aware somatically. And once that stuff started happening to me, I was like, holy moly, this is amazing. And I couldn't stop. Like it was like, I need to do this. And then I'm a teacher at heart. So it's like, I need to start teaching this. And so I started guiding men as well. And, and I meet great people like you.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Mark. So a few questions there.
Yeah.
I love that you brought up like the human experience. But before maybe we dig into that more, similarly, I was raised by a woman and not a very pro-man woman, if that makes sense. Like definitely did not like the masculine, did not like what men were, and was groomed in a lot of ways to not be okay with who I was.
Sure.
And so I guess then what followed that, when you said free up space inside, maybe can you explain a little more what that means and what that looked like for you? Like what freeing up space kind of means for you?
Yeah. On a very simple level, it means no longer ruminating,
Mm-hmm.
it means no longer waking up in the morning and thinking about the same dang thing. And it also means when I become aware of the fact that I'm starting to numb, I realize there's a lot that there's too much going on. I need help releasing. So let's use your retreat as an example. At your retreat, I dove into some grief. Mm-hmm. Now, the way in which, this is why I love men's work, is you can't do this type of stuff just haphazardly throughout the day, because it's a whole nother way of being. And so what's powerful about a men's intensive is you get together and you, in that space and time of from Thursday to Sunday, you get to show up differently. You get to get supported by a bunch of men, and you get to really dive into the things that you don't have the space and time. I've got a 4-year-old running around. I can't be doing grief work in the middle in the living room, because it's going to affect the way in which I show up as a father, because I'm going to be overly raw after, and I might, react to him negatively. Right. But when I'm with a group of men, like at your men's intensive in the Sierra Nevadas, and I'm able to tap into some grief, I have the space and the time to do it. I'm able to release through, screaming or crying, whatever it is that comes through. I'm being able to be held and supported and challenged by great men. All of a sudden inside, I feel a lot of space. And what that means is I no longer am thinking about the thing that I was thinking about. I'm able to problem solve, so become more of a solution oriented mindset, because I'm able to not be carried away with the depth of the emotional experience.
Thank you for explaining that, like what you meant there. So I guess another question is, I know a lot of the men's work journey is, maybe I hear a lot of like, let's hold space, or just do this, like go out into the woods and find peace or find presence, or like you're saying, like go on a retreat and you're able to really be in those moments and express yourself and make that space. But for you, coming back into your life, like what are either your strategies, or you found most effective for integrating like those lessons learned into your daily routine, like even with your kids, your job, with your wife?
Yeah, let me make sure I understand the question. So what is it? What does the integration look like? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah, that is the question. Yes. So just to maybe help some of the listeners understand like how to bring that back into their lives.
Yeah, oh geez, there's a bunch of ways I can answer that. What I'll say first though is it's the way in which I'm able to be present for others. So like I said, I got a 4-year-old, right? And a lot of my work recently is talking about how fathering is the most intense shadow work I've ever done, because fathering is I got a walking mirror out in front of me who is not only literally repeating the strange idioms that I didn't even know that I had, right? I'm like, how, do I say that? I say that. Interesting. Like even the tonation of how he talks, I'm like, oh, interesting. Just yesterday or this morning rather, I said to my wife something like, I'm gonna whatever. And my son said gonna. I was like, oh shoot, I should probably say I have to, or I need to, or use more grammatically correct English. But when it comes to fathering, if I'm full of just a lot going on in my life and I don't actually take the time to process and let things through, it shows up in the way in which I react to my kid. I'm less patient.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with my wife. My wife is going through something. I'm less present for her. And I, even if like we can have this facade of presence as men, and it's where like I'm still, and it looks like it. The appearance is that I'm paying attention, but inside I'm actually not. I'm noticing. I'm waiting for my next thing that I'm going to say, or I'm thinking about something else, whatever it is. When you do the men's work, when you do your work, you become aware of so much more about yourself. You're able to pass that on epigenetically to your kids, and you're able to show up to your relationships in a way that deepens the relationship. And what that typically looks like is you're able to be grounded, you're able to be present, you're able to be a resource for others because you've really taken care of yourself. One of the greatest lessons that I keep coming back to in my life, and Robert Falconer, one of my great mentors, reminded me of this recently with some work I did with him, is he was talking about how when your well is full, that's when you're able to give. And when your well is full and you're able to, and you're resourced, what I mean by that, when you're well resourced, you're able to give to others. And through that giving of others, you actually get more energy. And a lot of times, I know I was like this. I sort of was raised in this like martyr mindset that like others first before me. And that's not true. That's a very immature way of looking at how we can show up for others. And so if you're well resourced, and we could talk about the developmental need to have a strong group of men in your corner and the effect that has on your resource level. But when you have that and you go into your work, you go into your relationships, your parenting, my God, you're able to give to others because you're so resourced yourself.
Awesome. No, I mean, it makes sense to me, and thank you for explaining that. I think that gives a good idea of kind of what it takes and bringing the work home and bringing it and implementing it into your life.
Could I press into one thing that I heard you say?
Yeah, please.
So because you talked about, bringing men together, and I forget the way that you worded it, but there's a couple things that I think are really important. I don't really know your listener, but I always want to make sure that because we're using words here that you can relate to it differently. Mm-hmm. And the type of work that I'm talking about here is what I would consider to be stage 2 men's work. Stage 1 men's work would be, first of all, gathering with a group of men, opening up your heart, sharing what's really going on in your world. And that type of, emotional vulnerability, that's really powerful. And most men, that is transformative just to be able to do that, right? Mm-hmm. Most men feel, especially men who were not raised with a healthy male role model and a strong, mature male role model, would usually find more safety in women. So that next step to then go to a group of men, that's really powerful. And feeling held and loved and supported, that's stage 1, and that's really powerful. Stage 2 is when what I would call, iron sharpens iron. And it's, I'm going to be for you, but I'm also not going to let you continue. I'm not going to enable behaviors that are negative for you. I'm not going to listen to you talk about your marriage and the things that are going wrong with it and not reflect back to you where you may actually be causing, or you may be the co-creative agent in that conflict. I'm going to hold you accountable. And that's love. And that for a lot of men is really challenging. And not every man is ready for that, because if they haven't done the work to be able to step outside of victimhood and realize that a man is actually showing his love. A way that a mature man shows his love is by saying, I love you, and I'm going to hold a mirror up to you because I love you. And I'm not going to back away. I'm not going to abandon you. I'm going to be there with you through the challenge of you growing through what we're talking about. Right? And we can unpack what that means. But that's the type of work I'm talking about. And that's what I saw, us do at your retreat, which is challenging, confronting, but man, it's good.
No, I appreciate you taking the time to explain that, because that is a big, and it's a great analogy, right? Iron sharpens iron, like that metaphor of like, hey, we're both strong, but we're going to face each other and be tough on each other. I mean, maybe not literally, but be able to hold each other accountable to a different standard, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Like the way you put it, I love you, and is huge.
Yeah, and I think both are really important. Some men's groups will kind of do the whole rah, like pain is weakness leaving the body, push, which I actually think is a really immature model. And it lacks the heart. It lacks the psychological safety to be real. It just further pushes men into a very isolated, narrow way of being.
I think I would maybe argue that it becomes a little bit ego driven, or like it may be elitist, almost like, hey, I'm part of this group and we do this shit that's better than somebody else. But again, that's not, I understand. I know that's not what you do, and I know that's not what I strive for. I mean, I will say we do some cool things, but it's not necessarily that's incorporated with the physical challenges and is part of the emotional journey, I'd say. That's all. In case anyone listening was like, oh, you guys are out on retreats, but it's not just ego driven. It's for purpose and for unlocking some of the emotional like dams that we have. So Mark, you've touched on it a little bit, and I'm curious, because this is something that resonates with me, or was a big part of my life. You said you were raised by your mom, correct? Is that right?
More or less. Well, yeah, my mother, and then I called my nanas, which was technically my grandma and my great aunt who lived together.
Got it. So in that pursuit of like a male role model, do you feel like that's what you're trying to pursue or encourage other men to be, with the Fathers Without Compromise?
Tell me more. What do you mean?
Like, was that a big part of motivation to be that that father figure, that role model, considering that wasn't something that was readily available?
Not necessarily. There's a lot of research that talks about our core values as adults tend to be values that were a deficit as a kid. And so that definitely was a deficit for me. So there's definitely some cross through for that. But for me, what brought me to this body of work was a couple things. One, it was my own lack of healthy, mature male role models. But there was more than that, because as a high school English teacher, I worked in a public high school in New York, where I had a wide range of kids coming from different socioeconomic backgrounds. Had very wealthy kids in the same class with kids that were literally homeless. And I mean that literally, like they were texting each other about like which homes are vacant and they can sleep in. It's really, really sad. But in that experience, as an English teacher in particular, when you're looking at writing as a tool to discover the self, I'm reading these kids' essays. I'm getting to know them on a very deep level that most people didn't know. Their parents certainly didn't. And I read all these stories about, that were absent of men. And I got to realize that a lot of these kids growing up either didn't have fathers, their fathers were either incarcerated, left, or were working all day in New York City, which was a 2-hour train ride. So these fathers would get on the train at like 6:30 in the morning, They wouldn't get back until 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, and then they would rinse and repeat. So these kids did not know their dad. So I had played a surrogate father role model by being,
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
know, I was working with 16, 18, 19-year-old guys. One of my students, James Thomas, he, I'll never forget him. He was in the class when it was my last year of teaching, actually. And 6 weeks, I believe it was, after high school graduation, he killed himself. And when he killed himself, and I learned about it, my wife came out. We were in California at the time. My wife came out of the bedroom, and I'm weeping, like not subtle weeping. I am heaving, just so much sadness seeing, knowing that James had killed himself. And I just remember I went through that process of remembering all those times he and I spoke. Could I have said more? I had that grief process. But what I distinctly remember is that he did not have a strong male role model. He did not have a strong father. And I started doing more research. I have a book behind me by Warren Farrell, which probably a lot of your listeners know. He's done a lot of research on the boy crisis. When I was in undergrad and college, all of a sudden, all these things started to connect to me. I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much going on. Boys are failing out of school. 9th grade, there's called a pipeline where they get completely, basically they check out of school and either they drop out or they just fail and they get, and forgotten about why girls are doing so much better. All these things started connecting. There's a great documentary called Raising Cain, talks about raising boys in the United States. And it just got me to realize, holy crap, this is not spoken about publicly, which is a whole nother conversation about why it's not, which is such bullshit. And I can tell you why, from my perspective, why that's the case. You can tell that I love this because I'm talking faster. There's so much
I love it.
this, right?
I feel the passion.
But I just became aware of like, fuck, there's a lot. There's a whole body of work here that I can help in. That's the ikigai, right? Where can my skills apply to a need that I actually care about? Well, that's my ikigai. I not only have the societal recognized credentials to support men on this journey, but I also care deeply about it, and I'm in spaces where I'm able to. And so I decided, I sat down one day and I said, okay, if I had a year to live, what body of work would I want to contribute to? And that was an interesting week too, because in that week I was at Paramount Plus in Times Square in this bougie, like, I forget what floor it was, but I'm like right next to the balls drop. I'm in probably one of the most expensive real estate rooms in in the world, and I'm working with the senior vice presidents, and I'm like, I love doing this. This is great, and the thing that I really want to make sure I'm contributing to is the fatherhood space. I want to make sure when I die that I can say I worked to help other men step more fully into fatherhood. So that's the first answer to my question, why I'm passionate about it. But then the thing that really kind of cinched it for me, was this idea of, from an epigenetic standpoint, that if we really want to heal the next generation, we have to do the work ourselves. And now this is a controversial, many people will probably say that's BS. Fine. I'm not here to argue it, but what I have seen is go inside. And a lot of times what you'll see is when you do the work yourself, it translates to how your kids show up as well. So if you're really annoyed, like, I see a lot of men that your kid's taking too much time to get ready in the morning, it's likely because you have a history of that part of you that was taking its time or whatever. And you somehow were rushed as a kid, and your inability to be really present and patient and loving with your kid is a reflection of that aspect of your part being exiled, to bring IFS language into it. And when you're able to go in and release that burden, you don't pass that on anymore to your kids. Now, that's a very small example, but it's the same thing with addiction, right? And the presence process, I think is a great book that goes even deeper into this. But now I'm like full tilt into this work because if we really want to be a better father and we really want to help our kids, the best thing we can do from my perspective is to go inside and to reclaim the aspects of our own selves that were exiled as kids.
No, and that, I mean, and it's interesting that you bring it up that way, because it goes back to what you said earlier. Like if your kid is just saying gonna, like you say gonna, like what, you know what I mean? They're mirroring what we are
Totally.
giving them, and
Completely.
so that's
They're mirroring the
100%.
way in which I relate to my wife, and they're
Yep.
my son's learning right now. How do you show love in your marriage?
Yeah.
Right. If
And
I'm sarcastic to
yeah.
my wife right there, what does that really mean?
Mm-hmm.
Fuck. I've been sarcastic my whole life because I was raised in a sarcastic culture. But what does sarcastic actually do? It's cutting someone down so that you feel more comfortable. That's not what a healthy relationship does. You know what I mean?
No, 100%. And that's like that exact example is something I have to pay attention to myself. And it's interesting because it's like the things that probably bother me the most about like my sons are when I see myself in them, like an older version of me that has been imprinted on them. And that's the stuff that I think triggers me is like, oh shit, like they're acting how I acted. Like that's, that's alarming.
Yeah.
So it's just interesting you bring that up. Like I fully agree with you that the responsibility is ours to heal that next generation by giving the kids the tools we'd never got. Like as young men, there was no tools. Like growing up in the the 90s, there was the big overcorrect from like the 50s, of the women in the workplace. Like I'm not saying that's bad. I think that's totally great, but it's like I think the lack of attention that the lack of equality that came before that generation really set the stage to then have an overcorrect, which negatively affected the young generation that I grew up in. And then, we weren't given the same tools that now, like, I'm trying to pass on to my kids to help that generation out. So, no, I agree with you that it is our responsibility in that sense. I don't see how, I guess I don't see the argument that it isn't. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. But anyways, thank you. Sorry, it was a little bit of a tangent there, personal tangent.
Perfect. Bring that in. I'm sure your listeners too want to hear that. I know when I listen to podcasts too, I want to know more about the host. I don't just want it to be listening to a guest. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you, Mark. So what do you think, so kind of going into the future here, what do you think the future of like the men's work looks like? And maybe like how, this is kind of a two-part question, right? Like how do we make it more socially acceptable? And what I mean is like when I got into the men's work, my wife at the time was very dismissive of the work, like very resistant, thinking that it was very much that, as you described, that stage one men's work. Like we're just here boosting each other up, not really holding each other accountable, telling each other we're great. And so I guess it's like how do we get more men okay with being involved and like removing that, maybe that negative connotation or that stigma of like mental health, or how it's not, maybe it's not masculine, or it's not because I understand like the men's work's a little bit of a side step of traditional therapy, but embraces that same vein. I don't know, does that make sense? I'm asking that clearly? I kind of went in a few different directions there, but
yeah,
I guess like how do we,
I see a few questions in there. Want to see if there's one to start with?
So what do you see the future? Like what would be your way to get men's work more out in the world?
Sure. Okay, good question. So let's unpack that a little bit, right? Because I'll answer that directly, and if you don't feel like I do, challenge me, please. But what I'll say is this: I'm no longer, or at least I'm looking less for other people to accept it, and more so focusing in on who can I best support, right? Because the way I see it is we have a whole way of being in our culture that has become normalized that I consider to be rather unhealthy. And I can, go into specific examples of what I mean by that. One of them being, we spend, the majority of our waking hours working
Mm-hmm.
away from our families. And we do that for the majority of our lives, especially during the healthier years. And we spend the most of our time, involved in the working and then consuming and then the working and consuming. And that's really void of deep meaning. And it's no wonder why we have, such a loneliness epidemic in the world, because we're creatures of connection. We crave that. So I'm looking less to get people to say, good job, Mark, good work. And I'm more so looking at, who are the men that are ready for the type of work that I'm bringing to them. What I mean by that is stage 1 isn't bad. Stage 1's great. Stage 1's really healthy, really helpful. It's not to do that to get to stage 2. It's stage 1 is very healthy. Like, you gotta get together with a group of men, especially if you were raised without men that actually were kind. Very few men have actually been have been held in a man's arms as they cry and not been shamed or dismissed or popped a pill, given a pill, and to be turn it into some sort of homophobic thing. But to be able to do that, and to be, like, if I'm sobbing and a man is holding me, it's so incredibly healing.
Yeah, beautifully said.
That's really important. So to what I don't know your former wife, obviously, but I get what she's saying. And at the same point, I would say that that's bullshit, because of some men, they fucking need other men to build them up, especially if they've been told they're pieces of shit their whole life.
Mm-hmm.
If they're told that, hey, men and women are more important, they get on the boat first. And in a lot of countries, you're going to go serve in the military, and you're going to stand for this country and die, and I'm all about military. I have tremendous respect for that, but there's little credit often given to the fact that men have been doing that for generations, sacrificing their lives, literally. And so to be able to be held by other men and told, you're important, you're worthy just as you are, you don't have to do anything else, that's actually very helpful for a certain group of men. Not all men, but for a lot of men in particular, it's very helpful. So I would say that's actually really needed for a lot. And then once they get to their confidence is like, actually, I am an amazing person, then it's sure, we can go to the more challenging stuff, because then we don't want to further enable behavior. Men like you and me, it sounds like, were raised more so. I know for me, I was definitely raised more of the, you're special, you're amazing. And even though I definitely have done a lot of work on myself to love myself for who I am, I definitely benefit more from the iron sharpens iron type of work, because I was never given that as a guy, as a kid growing up. Very few people really challenged me. I was a very talented kid by myself. I've been pretty successful my whole life, but very few have actually really seen my potential and pushed me a little bit further with love, not with aggressive behavior. So
Nice.
how did that answer your question? Oh, so how do I get that out? So what I do is this. I do publicly share about my work on the platforms that I'm on. And I'm pretty well known in the LinkedIn community space because of my work in the executive space.
Mm-hmm.
And I do share about men's work there, and the majority of the time it's actually received very well. And I have a lot of women reach out to me, a lot of men reach out to me, say they appreciate it. I get one-to-one clients through there as well. Once in a while, I'll get someone that, one of our mutual friends calls a troll, and I'll get someone on there and say like, this is toxic masculinity from the 90s. And what I often notice is that person hasn't actually read what I wrote.
Yeah.
They're actually reacting to something that is a projection of what they think I represent. And I guarantee you, if me and that man had a conversation, he would likely have a different perspective. And that would likely be incredibly valuable work for that man. Because
Absolutely,
typically the strongest emotional reactions we have, that's the greatest trailhead to personal discovery.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you said it right there, right? That's the best way to get this in the world, is having the conversations, being open and speaking about it, and keeping the conversation going. Like being able to call a man forward on those sorts of things, like that sort of behavior or those triggers.
Well, could we
and
go?
even, yeah, please.
Could I go one step deeper?
Yeah, I'd love it.
Because a lot of what we're talking about here is like, how does it fit to be a man, to be a man in our culture? And that's a relational model that's based on current society and cultural norms,
Mm-hmm.
right? What I have, and what really drives my own personal growth is soul embodiment. And we can go deeper into what that means. But what I mean specifically is that is very few people actually know who they are and what gifts they have to bring to the world, because we have lost a mature rite of passage in our culture.
Mm-hmm.
And we have replaced it with surface level, meaningless rites of passage. Giving a phone to someone, even the bar mitzvah for my Jewish friends, like, is often not actually of depth like it used to be.
Yeah.
And to really uncover who you really are, what your unique thread is to the tapestry of this whole human experience here on earth, you got to really go deep. And we see this often played out in very immature ways in our culture. Typically with men, it's typically drinking or binge drinking. You have to go to an element of depth, of death, to find out who you really are. But that doesn't actually touch the surface, right? And what you're doing with your retreats, I think, is a really good reclamation of a healthier rite of passage, where you are taking men to really enter into the cave of their fear. And in that place of fear, they're able to transform, because that fear is no longer controlling them. And oftentimes fear is what controls the way in which we behave in this world. And if you're able to stick your head into the demon that you're the most afraid of, often that demon disappears. Especially then when you're witnessed by a whole bunch of other men who love and support you at that level, you can't go back to your earlier way of being. That's disrespectful. David White once says, you make a promise that will kill you, that will break you, or will kill you if you break it.
Mm-hmm.
There comes a time in your life where you make a promise, whether it's to God or whatever you want to say, that it will kill you if you break it. And that's the type of depth that I believe this journey we're talking about takes you on.
That's really well said, and I think relatable to a lot of people. I think a lot of men, obviously, we've pushed some edges that were in the drinking world or drugs or just trying to find and touch death, right? But I'd say never found what we were really looking for in that. And I'd say I know personally I took that even further. Like you, I did triathlon my late 20s.
Yeah.
And then also I raced cars. I did anything that would bring me closer to death. That was like challenging. That could, if something went wrong, it could potentially be the end of me. But never did I pay attention to maybe what I was really looking for in my emotions or in my psyche or my soul. So it's I think that it relates to excuse me, a lot of people, a lot of men listening, I'm sure, have done stupid shit, to find that, but have really not been understanding why they're going through that.
Well, here's the thing why I love triathlon. Triathlon got me to see that my body, I'm able to do so much more with my body than I was ever told. And I think that's a metaphor for really a lot of areas of our lives. Is you kind of alluded to this earlier, but we are growing up, from my perspective, in an extremely soft culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I should probably unpack what I mean by that, but I mean a culture that doesn't really hold people high.
Yeah.
How often do you hear the stay safe, drive safe, keep safe?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm going to be
Absolutely.
safe here. And it's like, I get it. But that brings me to one short story I'll just share, which is Icarus. You know the story of Icarus?
Just let it out.
He escaped the prison, and his father fastened wings to his back so he can fly and escape. And his wings were fastened with wax. You know the story?
I think I've heard it, but yeah.
So, you know, it's okay if you didn't, but what do you remember that his father said to him? His father said what? He gave him a warning. What was the warning?
Actually, I don't know.
That's okay. So it was,
yeah.
Most people would remember this. Don't fly too close to the sun, because if you fly too close to the sun, what's going to happen?
The wax melts.
Yeah, the sun is going to melt the wax on your back, and you're going to fall into the ocean, drown, and die. And that's what happened. And the story of the metaphor, or the lesson in that, is hubris. Don't have overbearing pride in your life. And that is, and literally, as a former teacher, I could attest that is still a core theme that is taught in a high school curriculum across this entire country, the world even, I would argue. And it's a good lesson. Don't have overbearing pride, right? I get that. That makes sense. However, there was a second warning that was given to Icarus. It was, don't fly too low, because if you fly too low, you think too low of yourself, the waves are going to lap up and they're going to splash on your wings, and they're going to harden the wax, and you're going to fall into the ocean, you're going to drown, and you're going to die. And most people don't know that part of the story as well. And from my perspective, we're flying way too fucking low. We have so much more potential in this life. And triathlon is just one small example of, like, I think people trying to realize, oh, I can do much more.
I love that, man. Thank you. And thank you for sharing and sharing the lessons from that. So I want to ask you, if people want to find you or see what you do or learn more about you and Mark, how do they find you? If they want to do like executive coaching or Fathers Without Compromise,
I appreciate it,
websites or please.
Yeah, just head to my website. It's Mark W. Guay, MarkWguay.me. Or if you just look up Mark Guay, Fathers Without Compromise, it usually comes up.
Awesome, man.
I want to mention as well, you can go to Insight Timer. There's free meditations there. And a lot of my latest meditations are on fatherhood and men's work. And there's a new course I just launched called Awaken the Father King. And you can access that on Insight Timer for free. And you can download it on my website as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Any last things you want to say?
No, man. I just, other than, I have deep respect for you. I think what you're doing with rewilding men and reintroducing them to the wisdom of nature, my understanding is the original meaning or the original definition of psyche involved a relationship with nature, and we've lost that. And I think the work that you're doing is incredibly potent and needed, and it gets me excited. And, I look forward to you and I partnering on a retreat in the future.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mark. I really appreciate that. And thank you for being here. And thank you everyone for listening and tuning in, and be well.